Welcome to the Law Codex podcast. In this episode, I'll be speaking with Nick to provide you with an insight into Herbert Smith Freehills, and we're going to touch on the work of a trainee at a firm, some different cultural elements, and some other aspects of working at a large international firm like Herbert Smith Freehills as well. So just to sort of begin, could you provide a little background into yourself, so you know what you did before you started your training contract?
Sure. So I'm originally from Argentina, not from around here. I've moved around the world my whole life and came to London for university only. So I studied politics, philosophy and law at King's College London, which is kind of a mix of a law degree and a non-law degree. So many would say best of both worlds. So it's a 4-year degree. And then once I finished that, I did vacation schemes in the summer of my 3rd year. And then I finished my university degree and did the LPC straight after because my dad said he wouldn't pay for a 6-month gap year. And then started at the firm after finishing the LPC.
Yeah, so, as a student, there are many firms you can choose. There are lots of sort of international firms, there are more regional firms, firms with different sort of areas that they focus on. So why was it that you chose Herbert Smith Freehills?
I mean, like many law students, when you apply to, it's no secret, you apply to more than one firm, and you apply to as many as you can within the realm of which ones you actually want to apply to. I did 2 vacation schemes, one at Herbert Smith Freehills and one at Cummington and Burling, which is an American firm which has an office in London. And I interviewed at Slaughter and May as well, so a bit of a mix. But what drew me to HSF specifically was the international aspect. Like I said, I've grown up around the world my whole life, and that's something I wanted to keep going forward. That being said, that was the only thing I applied to HSF with, and I remember the day before my interview, I started researching the firm, trying to find out what they were actually good at. So, it's really difficult, I think, when you're applying to decide which firms to choose and which firms not to choose. And sometimes it's more about just going for it and seeing what happens.
Yeah, and you spoke a little bit about, maybe before you applied to a few days before the interview, you did a lot more research and you found more about the firm. So from, the very beginning, before you applied to now that you're a trainee, how has your view of the firm changed over that period of time?
So the good thing is that the international aspect is definitely played out, and that was from before I was a trainee. So I did a vacation scheme at the firm in the summer of my 3rd year of uni. Then I went on an international vacation scheme to the Hong Kong office. So I went for 2 weeks in December of my 4th year to the Hong Kong office, which is super cool. And then during my training contract, I did an international secondment in the Tokyo office, and I'm actually qualifying into the Tokyo office next month. The international aspect definitely played out, and not just in terms of mobility, because I know for a lot of people that's not the main concern, but also in terms of the work. I can say that I've worked with every office in the network. I've used every single one of my languages and languages that I thought weren't ever going to be used in a professional context. The international nature played out. But kind of for me, looking back, why I would have applied to HSF going forward is, one is the intellectual stimulation that comes with being a lawyer. And I guess that is common, across most firms. But there's one thing about HSF, which is it's a very entrepreneurial firm. Even on my back scheme, from people having talked to people, it seemed clear that if you had kind of an idea or a practice area which you wanted to build, and there was potential to build it and a business case for it, as with everything, it would get built. So one of my supervisors on my back scheme built the HSF business and human rights practices from scratch. One of my supervisors in my training contract built the HSF climate change practice from scratch, which today has become into the ESG practice, which is massive. And like that, and it made me realize that it's not just a space where the people at the top tell you what to do and you do that. It's also, you can suggest things, and that could become the next big thing.
Yeah, that sounds really interesting. The fact that, people within the firm can actually suggest ideas, put forward a business case to show that there's actually sort of maybe demand, or there'll be a benefit of this sort of idea, and then the firm will actually consider it and potentially allow you to do it. I think that's very interesting about Herbert Smith
Yeah.
Freehills. And you spoke about sort of the international nature of the firm, and one of the sort of aspects of that international nature is secondment opportunities.
Mm-hmm.
So just for somebody who perhaps is just starting out researching firms, they may know that you can maybe spend some time in a different office, but how does the process of secondment work? Like, do you have to apply for different countries, or and do you apply for sort of practice areas within those countries, or you just assigned it? Could you just sort of touch on how secondment actually works in practice?
Sure. What I say will only apply to HSF, because I know secondments work differently across every firm. But at HSF, you're encouraged to do a secondment, whether it's client or international. And in general, there's kind of an even split between trainees in a cohort as to who wants to do a client secondment or who wants to do international secondment. And both have their benefits and negatives, so there's nothing wrong with doing one or the other. And we apply for seat rotations every 6 months. So once the seat rotations come in, you apply and you put down preferences out of 6, and you put down supporting comments, and then it gets put through an algorithm, and the partners then play around with what the results are. And the same applies for secondments. There's no special application for secondments. So you're considered for a secondment just like you're considered for another seat.
Fantastic. And sort of perhaps moving along from the international nature, but it's perhaps related as well. So diversity and inclusion is often repeated in open days and on websites, and a lot of firms talk about that they have a commitment to this area. So what does Herbert Smith Freehills do particularly well within D&I?
I think D&I it's a difficult space because there's a lot of work to do, and we're nowhere near where we should be. But the good thing is that the firm recognizes that, and it's doing what it can at this stage to push itself forward. So, for example, I am a mental health champion, which means that I've been trained by the firm by a professional psychologist who works with the firm to better support our people, in case there's something goes wrong, or at least a signpost what services to use and where to go if an issue arises, or even just, if we're on a call, instead of going straight to our work, asking how someone's doing, which can make a big difference, especially working from home and with all that. So working from home is another one, right? So as trainees, it was almost unthinkable 2 years ago that we would ever work from home, and here we are kind of working from home every day. We don't know how it is going to be going forward, but the firm, for example, has already put out a policy of working 60% and in the office, 40% at home. And you may think, I don't know how that works with D&I, but the reality is that one of the big things is that a lot of people have kids, a lot of people have other, life commitments, and having that flexibility allows people, I think, to be who they are, more than, trying to go to the office every day and put up a uniform or a mask and pretend to be someone they're not. The firm also has kind of very strong networks in every intersection that you think of diversity, and the networks aren't there for nothing. So just to give an example, our CEO is openly gay, and he's the head and sponsor of our LGBT network, the Iris Network. And if you get involved in the networks, and it doesn't matter if you're part of the LGBT community, or if you're female, or if you have some form of physical or mental disability, the networks are there to support everyone as an ally or as not an ally. And by being involved in networks, you will get benefits, client and non-client, that you wouldn't get if you weren't in them.
Yeah, and it sounds like, even if you maybe don't identify as part of the group, you can learn maybe of, some of their, what it actually is like to be part of the group, and have that dialogue so that you can form a more cohesive, firm, and so you can have better, relationships between, the employees within the firm. So I think that sounds good as well.
Absolutely. So, for example, we have a multiculturalism network, and, after, the Black Lives Matter movement in the past year and stuff, that I guess the firm really considered what it needed to do as a result of that. And we're getting what are called anti-racism workshops across the firm. And this is obviously isn't just for people who identify as being BAME, it's for anyone and everyone, because it's important for everyone to get involved in the conversation and to make a difference, really.
Yeah, so we've touched a lot about, the international nature and perhaps the culture of the firm Herbert Smith Freehills. But just to move maybe to the work of the firm. So, I read that media platform The Lawyer described Herbert Smith Freehills as having long been regarded as one of London's leading litigation firms and ferocious litigators at that. But Herbert Smith Freehills is, of course, a large full-service firm. So what other opportunities exist beyond litigation and dispute resolution?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's interesting because Herbert Smith traditionally, so the English arm of the today Herbert Smith Freehills merger, did used to be primarily a litigation firm, and that's what people think of it now. But in my experience, that's completely incorrect. One of the reasons why after doing my vacation schemes I chose HSF is because it's a full service firm, and because it's very difficult as a law student, or even as any type of student, sorry, to know what kind of law you want to do. And to go into a firm which specializes in one thing is difficult, because it means that if you don't like that one thing, then you're left with little option, or you're left with options that perhaps aren't, what you call top of the market, etc. But the firm has, excellent teams in employment, real estate, in project finance, in departments that you wouldn't think of HSF as being renowned for. So I think it's fair to say that the firm has, has any practice area which you'd expect a full service firm to have, and chances are that the practice area is fairly well ranked in the market.
And sort of beyond the practice areas, in the experience of a trainee, on the legal cheat page, I also read about Herbert Smith Freehills. The juniors commended the high level of training and good quality of work throughout the training contract. Has this description matched your experience, as a trainee at the firm?
I think when I get asked this, I always tell people a training contract is what you make it out to be. And this is something I guess HSF gives you the space for. If you want to sit back and do the minimum, then that's fine, and people won't really complain. But if you are there and you want to get involved in higher responsibility work, you will get given that work. So in my second seat, I was in corporate energy. I've led various transactions on my own. I was running client calls, giving pieces of advice, and I didn't think I'd be doing that kind of as a trainee at all. There's always someone supervising, but the point is that I was running everything by myself, and if I needed help was there. And similarly, in my third seat, when I went on to comment to Tokyo, I went to the arbitration practice. I was drafting witness statements, pleadings, and all forms of kind of arbitration documents on my own as a first draft. And again, that's not something I thought I would be doing as a trainee, but because I was interested and I said that I would be up for the challenge, then that was given to me. And I think that's the most important thing about being a trainee at HSF, is that if you want better work, you will get it.
I think it's interesting just how much responsibility you said you're given, because I think people traditionally associate sort of high responsibility, experience as a trainee with either a US firm who has a small intake, or a more maybe regional firm which has a small trainee intake as well. So the fact that Herbert Smith Freehills is, an international, full service law firm allows its sort of trainees to have a lot of exposure and a lot of responsibility. If you're able to sort of meet that responsibility, that sounds very interesting to me. And within, the element of your work, what would you say is the most exciting project you've had the opportunity to work on?
I mean, I'm qualifying into arbitration, so I'm kind of biased to say that an arbitration would be the most exciting. But I found across my training contract that, the work that you do, especially as a junior, I found it's more about the type of work you do rather than if it's sexy or not sexy. Because at the end of the day, if you're working on the most high profile case in the country and it comes out in the news, but you're doing, very menial work, then chances are you're not going to remember that case very well. No matter how sexy it is, and no matter how cool it is when your mom says, "Oh my God, did you work on this?" And I have stuff like that from my vaccine where I worked on stuff like this, but I was doing very little. But yeah, I'd say the arbitration work I was doing in the Tokyo office was the most exciting because I was doing the most kind of intellectually stimulating and exciting work. And both were arbitrations in that side of the world. Yeah.
Awesome. And of course, work is, fundamental to the role of a trainee within a firm. That's why trainees exist, to help the firm to do work, to, as you said, maybe take a little bit more responsibility as you gain more experience. But what opportunities for, social events or other more informal, events are there within the firm in a more social context?
Yeah, I mean, look, at the end of the day, a job is a job, right? And you get to decide whether that job becomes your life or whether it is just your job. And once you finish your work, I'm not going to say at what hour because we all know that that's what it is. When you leave the office or when you log off in this COVID world, that's when your kind of connection with work ends. But if you did want to have that kind of social side at work, it's definitely there. And it's so, there's sports teams, there's different activities, networks that are going on. For example, now also working from home, most teams have what's called coffee roulette, which is when you get paired up with a random associate partner or of counsel or other trainee for half an hour and you just talk to them. And generally people don't want to talk about work, so they don't talk about work. So, there's definitely stuff there to keep you going. The other thing to keep in mind that the social interactions aren't just limited to HSF. HSF, and I think the legal sector in particular, is very aware that, its competitor might the next day be its partner and its client by next day be on the other side. So, I mean, we do the LPC with, I think now it'd be 5 other firms, but when I did it was 4 other firms. And we're encouraged to make friends with Slaughter and me trainees. And, some of my closest friends are from other firms. And there's and that's amazing because what you have is you have kind of a ready-made set of people who are living similar experiences to you that you can talk to. And as a young professional, I think that's extremely valuable because I have friends who ended up in other areas, other professional areas, and they're the only ones that are in their 20s. And that's hard because you go to work and everyone suddenly talks about their daughters or their sons, and you're the one there being like, but I want to go party. And when you have a lot of people your age around you, it makes life a lot easier. So I think, yeah, the social side, like I said, it's what you make it out to be, but the tools are there for you to make that happen.
Yeah, and you've spoken about, COVID and the impact that's had, perhaps, the 60-40 split that may happen with working from home after, the pandemic finishes. But for you personally, and maybe, for the firm generally, what do you think the biggest challenges have been regarding COVID?
I mean, I've been really fortunate. So I spent March to September in the Tokyo office where the COVID restrictions didn't impact our working life as much. And because I'm from South America, I then, went for a month in December to South America. So my kind of response to this is limited because I've only really been in this COVID working environment, the UK working environment, for around 5 months. But I think the hardest, and again, I'm fortunate because I am a 4th seat trainee. So I had 2 seats in the office and I had, most of my seat in Tokyo was in the office. So I came into my 4th seat having done 3 seats, as your normal training contract. But I think it's really hard for 1st and 2nd seaters and for people coming into the profession now, because we grew up with an image of what it's like to go into the office and to what it's like to be a lawyer for the first time, and suddenly that gets turned upside down. So I think the biggest challenge is just being open-minded. And the most important thing I found is remembering that everyone is in the same boat. And we may find it challenging that we don't know how to use the systems and there's no one around us to help, but partners will find it challenging because I know some partners or seniors that were mostly working without their laptops, so they'd find it challenging to suddenly turn to digital. Or obviously there are partners which have dogs and kids running around, and it's difficult when you're doing everything at the same time. Homeschooling. Let alone the mental health challenges of being enclosed within your 4 walls. So I think the biggest challenges of being a a trainee during COVID-19 aren't at all connected to being a trainee. They're just connected to biggest challenges of being a human being during COVID-19. And I think that's something that the entire country is going through. So I think we'd all be well prepared and at the same time not prepared to be a trainee in that sense.
Fantastic. And I think we've spoken a lot about, what it's like to actually be a trainee, at Herbert Smith Freehills, the work, the culture, the social elements. But just finally, in one word, how do you describe your experience, as a trainee at Herbert Smith Freehills, and why?
If I can give more than one word is stimulating. Kind of my goal going into career was to find something that was stimulating. And not every day is stimulating, and not every task I do and not every matter I'm on is stimulating. But when I have been stimulated, I've been very stimulated, and I found that very rewarding. I'd say also rewarding is another one. You get recognition for the work that you do, and it may not come. Some people expect every email from someone to be like, "Oh, well done, that was great." No, that's not the reality of the job, but there is recognition somewhere at the end of the day, and you're there to get it. And then the third one I'd say is openness. I do think that HSF is a firm where you can come and be who you are, no matter who you are. And it's a classic thing. I've spoken to grad students before, and the question is, what should I do in the interview? And I always say, just be yourself. And that's, I guess, the really good thing about HSF is that you can be yourself, and that's okay. Actually, it's more than okay. It's perfect, and by being yourself is where you'll get the most, reward and the most stimulation.
Fantastic. Well, I guess that wraps up the podcast. So I'd like to thank Herbert Smith Freehills for agreeing to take part in this podcast, and for you as well, taking part in this podcast and answering some of the questions that I put to you. I think a lot of valuable advice and insights were given, again, into the life of a trainee within a firm. So thank you very much for joining, Nick. And I think it's been, a very valuable podcast episode.
All right. Thanks, Rami.